You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country, that's back to you, far more than a lot of people said they should have.
Have you said thank you once this entire meeting? No, in this entire meeting, have you said thank you?
Oh, it was a blowout, all right. Ukrainian President Zelensky clashing with President Trump and Vice President Vance at the White House on Friday. Zelensky was there to sign a rare earth minerals deal, but he was removed from the White House after the blow-up, and he didn't sign anything. Secretary Scott Bessent says that as of now, that deal is no longer on the table. I spoke with the chairman of the president's outside intelligence advisory board, Devin Nunes, about it yesterday on Sunday Morning Futures.
Look at what happened last week with the Zelensky meeting. What was lost on everyone is what President Trump was trying to do there is talk about rare earth elements and how Ukraine can play an important role in that. China has went around the globe over the last 30 years with their Belt Initiative, and they've locked up these minerals where they control them all. So Zelensky, whether or not he realized it or not, President Trump was trying to say, hey, let us get in there, form an economic partnership. China's done this, Maria, without ever firing a bullet. They're doing it through economic means. Hopefully Zelensky understands it, our European allies understand it. I think you'll see people get back to the table quickly.
You think Zelensky will ultimately sign that rare earth minerals deal? You think he'll come back and sign it?
Either him or somebody else, but they're going to have to end the war, and they're going to have to build economic ties with the West.
Joining me now is Equinox Partners Chief Investment Officer and President Sean Fieler. Sean, good to see you. Thanks so much for being here. Your thoughts on all of this?
Well, let's say as a general rule, trading mining investments, mining concessions for government, military, and financial support is a good idea. The Chinese do this globally. As to whether or not that's a good idea in Ukraine, I think is up for debate. Right, their mineral reserves are unproven, and then the security guarantees, the military guarantees necessary would be quite substantial.
So, okay, so you think it's unproven. You don't even know if the product is there to get extracted.
Well, so it's there. The question is it economic? And then how near term is it, right? These are not existing producing mines. These are new mines that would have to be explored. It would take years. It would cost hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. And so I think financially, I'm skeptical this makes sense. Whether geopolitically this makes sense, I think that's really an open question. And making sure that we're there and we have a claim on these mineral rights and the Chinese don't, I think there is a strong logic to that.
Yeah, I mean, that's where you see President Trump understands his customer in China. You recently attended the BMO Global Metals and Mining Conference in Hollywood, Florida. What are you hearing about domestic mining right now? Where else are there opportunities?
Well, I say one of the really interesting dynamics is, so America's really ceded the global mining sector to the Canadians, the Australians, and to the Chinese. And so for those foreign companies now that have assets here in the United States, those companies are looking at redomiciling here in the United States. They're trying to populate their boards with Americans, because really there are relatively few American-led companies with American executives and American boards in this sector.
Why? Why not? I mean, why did America see that? Yeah.
We've been hostile to mining for a long time. We closed the Bureau of Mines in 1996. We have a state and federal network of regulations that make it very hard to advance mining projects here in the United States. And Canada and Australia and China have been aggressive in terms of bringing these industries into their countries and then taking that industry globally.
Really interesting. Over the weekend, President Trump directed the Commerce Department to investigate potential harms that lumber imports pose as well. He was talking about this, the impact on national security. The order comes as a 25% tariff on Canadian and Mexican goods, plus an additional 10% tariff on China, scheduled to go into effect tomorrow. But Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick told me yesterday that it's a fluid situation. He basically left the door open to a lowered tariff, lower than 25% on Mexico and Canada. Watch this.
Both Mexico and Canada have done a reasonable job on the border. They're both working hard on the border, but the Fentanyl continues to come into this country and continues to murder our people. So he's sort of thinking about right now how exactly he wants to play it with Mexico and Canada, and that is a fluid situation. There are going to be tariffs on Tuesday on Mexico and Canada. Exactly what they are, we're going to leave that for the president and his team to negotiate.
Sean, that's about the most positive I've heard in terms of what these tariffs look like. He left the door open to a lowered number. What do you think?
Well, I think from certainly for the largest imports from Canada into the United States, the oil and gas. So those tariffs were only ever slated to be 10%, not 25%, so not particularly disruptive. And then talking to executives in the Canadian oil and gas space, they see a lot of that impact being absorbed by changes in the Canadian dollar exchange rate versus the US dollar. And then they see a lot of those costs being borne by the US consumer and not so much Canadians.
Right.
I'd say the more interesting aspect of this is the unity Canada has in terms of moving their, especially oil and gas, overseas without it going through America. So there's a big change going on in Canadian policy with respect to oil and gas.
Interesting. We'll see how that plays out. China is going to see a 20% number because, Cheryl, jump in here. You remember initially it was 10%, then the president said another 10%. So China is facing a 20% tariff on Tuesday, Cheryl.
Exactly. And, you know, when it comes to China, you know, we've already heard the rhetoric kind of pick up out of Beijing over the last week because of this additional 10% tariff, Maria. And also, Sean, really quick, I want to go back to something that you said earlier to Maria. I'm curious, you said that you didn't think the minerals deal for Ukraine was a good deal for the United States. I was looking at this. Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't Russia sitting on about 40% of the rare earth minerals that Ukraine has?
Yeah, so that's another complicating factor is a lot of the rare earths in Ukraine are in the occupied territories of Ukraine that are controlled by Russia. I think if you're thinking about getting back some of the $350 billion that Trump says we've put into Ukraine, this is going to be a hard way to do it. And then to get the initial capital to exploit these resources in Ukraine from the private sector, I think that's also going to be a challenge. We just don't have the domestic mining sector, and we don't have national mining companies that can be impressed upon to go do that in Ukraine. So I think even getting this off the ground is going to be hard, which is not to say that this doesn't make sense geopolitically. Making sure that the Chinese or others are not in Ukraine controlling rare earths, I think, does make a lot of sense.
All right, we'll leave it there. Sean, great to get your take. Thanks so much.
Thank you.